702.
You're listening to the best of The Money Show.
The Money Show.
Welcome to the best bits of The Money Show, a digest of just some of the most interesting interviews, thoughts and insights and comments this week. If you'd like to hear more, please go to our website or your podcast app and search for The Money Show. It's a good idea often to share it with someone. You might find there's someone in your life about to make a financial decision or someone who you just think the insight might resonate with. To start, some of the stories that we thought were important from this week. Gold climbed to a record high of over $3,500 an ounce. It was extraordinary to watch through the week as it went over $3,500 to $3,560 at one point, but really did move very, very quickly. Ousted members of the board of SA Tourism, they filed their urgent application with the High Court in Tshwane. They want to overturn the decision by the Tourism Minister, Patricia de Lille, to dissolve them. There's a lot going on in that story, as you know. The Italian fashion designer and billionaire brand owner, Giorgio Armani, passing away at the age of 91, and an appeals court in Washington, D.C. saying that some of the tariffs, most of the tariffs, in fact, imposed by the U.S. President Donald Trump are unconstitutional. He says he'll appeal. It really does just add to the tariff uncertainty at the moment. Tonight, we bring you a mix of stories from the world of money from the week that has been. This week, our business book review, Ian Mann, the managing director of Gateway's Business Consultants, looked at the book Lifting Up, The Transformative Power of Supportive Leadership. It's by Jen Ma. And Ian particularly looking at how it wants supportive, human-centered leadership, and particularly at a time when it seems to me being a leader is perhaps tougher than ever.
I think it's actually very practical, and I think that's why it's very useful. The fact is that if you look at employee equity, and there's been quite a lot of work done, Gallup polls done work on employee equity regularly and often, and what they've come up with this is that the most important person in employees being engaged, not equity, sorry, engagement, employee engagement. Most important thing in employee engagement is management, more than anything else. And that the most important manager, the most important thing a manager can be is to be supportive, to be a supportive manager. And the good news is that supportive management isn't a natural trait. It's something that can be learned. And that what this book does is it basically gives you a way to understand what you need to do and then how to do it. I think in that sense it's very valuable. But if we look at what's going on in the world today, I think that we probably suffering from more mental illnesses, more mental challenges than we've ever done before. Everything from the anxiety disorders all the way through to depression and to burnout. I think that is so common in the workplace today. And it's got to do with all of the fact that we're living under such pressure and the world is not getting any easier. And if certain parts of the world are more difficult, where we are is very difficult. And under those circumstances, the role of the manager, and the Gallup poll showed this, the manager is the most significant person in your life, probably equal to, according to the stats, equal to that of a partner.
Sure.
So if you had a bad day with a partner, it'll mess up your ability to function for a little while.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing happens with the manager, except that you probably spend more time with the manager, or you could be spending more time with the manager than you do with your partner. So it becomes terribly important that we know what to do. In addition to which, we're starting to employ Gen Zs. Those are people born after 1998 about. Those people are the most different people we've ever had as our children or our employees.
Really? That's a big thing to say.
No,
it's interesting.
They're the only generation that grew up with a cell phone in their hand.
Ah, yes.
When we meet next time, I will be able to share with you the impact of social media on everything, just the way we perceive reality. Now, those people are suffering as well, and by the way, they've got much higher, and we don't understand them. We really don't understand them. Now, if you look at what a supportive leader can possibly do or should be doing, probably the best example is this: the woman who founded the hospice movement. She used to communicate. This is a quotation. She used to communicate to people that you matter because you're you, and you'll matter because you're you until you pass away. And that, she said that the people said of her that was a message you got from her, incredibly strong message. And that was very, very affirming. I think we have to do the same sort of thing with our staff, except obviously at a different level. But the point of noticing people, I notice you as a person. The key issues to make it happen is to notice, to affirm, and to let people know you need them. What we don't do much of is we don't notice people well, how they're doing, how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what issues are they dealing with. We don't affirm them by saying to them, that presentation you did, I can really see the effort you put in, just that much. And or what you did, your presentation really helped us to close the deal. The reason we don't do that is because we go into what they call the awkward zone. And the awkward zone is the gap between our compassion and our ability to act. And often we're stuck in the awkward zone because we simply don't know what to do. And we have staff issues, which could be anything from colleagues not, you can't get on with colleagues, or you've got family issues, or you've got work issues, you've got just complainers with no solutions. All those sorts of things happen in the workplace, and you have to respond to them. The way most people respond is they either try to be the fixer. Yeah, I know you're getting a divorce. You should know when I was getting a divorce. And the person looks at you and says, your divorce has got nothing to do with me, and it's not the same. Or you get other people who aren't fixers, but are deflectors. So when you tell me that something's really going wrong in your life or your workplace, I just deflect. I'll talk about anything else except that, or I'll ignore you, which just makes it worse. Or I don't know. I'll try and sort out your play. The fact is, and she gives a fabulous example, which captures absolutely everything. She believes that we don't need verbs. Sorry, we don't need nouns when somebody's in trouble. I don't need to empathize with you. Empathy is a noun. I need a verb. She describes she moved into a new village, and before she moved in, somebody said to her, our kids are going to be the same age. When you move into this village, let us know, we'll have a carpool. She said the first day she moved in, the woman said to her, how's it going? She said, it's terrible. I've got all these things to do. I'm not coping. And the woman, instead of saying, I really feel for you, I know what it must be like, the woman said to her, do you have food in your fridge? And she said, no. And that was it. And she said the woman came back about an hour later with all she could possibly need for breakfast the next day and a bottle of wine. We don't need, and this is a very, very important point. If you're not somebody who's naturally empathetic, naturally supportive, we don't need that. Just verb people. Things are going wrong. Do you need any help? Is there any way in which I can connect you with a counselor? Is there any way that I can have a conversation with you and your colleague? We need to respond to our staff. First, we need to notice. We need to affirm them. We need to take action, and we need to use verbs.
That was Ian Mann. The book is Lifting Up the Transformative Power of Supportive Leadership by Jen Ma, looking at supportive leadership and how it can make a big impact on people.
702. You are listening to The Money Show's best bits.
On Business Unusual this week, we looked at the nuanced differences between a leader and a manager. You often need both of these people, but they do different types of things. Advaita Naidoo, Africa Managing Director at Jack Hammer Global, looking at how people, managers and leaders influence organizational culture and performance, and looks at the differences when it comes to innovation and fostering proper management.
Obviously both involve responsibility for people and outcomes, but a manager is about the execution, like structure, the KPIs, the efficiency, and they'll be good problem solvers and can delegate quite effectively. But the leader is more about direction, the vision, the culture, the purpose, and that's sometimes thought of as the softer stuff, unfortunately, but they inspire or they guide teams towards a shared vision. And I think they're equally important, but people conflate them because in well-run and high-performing organizations, you'll see them work quite well together and assume that they're the same. And then the second thing is, as people become more technically competent and expand their responsibility on the process management side, I think there's always the assumption that they will be seen as leaders and relied on for more than just structure.
Do you see it day to day? I mean, you can sort of tell the difference if you watch an office or a group of people or a company, who's the leader, who's the manager. And obviously good, well-run companies need both of those people.
I think practically, and to be a bit reductive, managers handle the how, the budgets, the reporting, the resources. They fix the problems, they ensure the predictability, but leaders focus more on the why and the where. Why are we doing this and where are we headed? And a manager might say something like, the project is due on Friday, here's the plan for executing. And a leader will take the different perspective and say, this project matters because it positions us for the next decade or, whatever the strategy is. But I think let's not assume that it's dichotomous, because there are leaders who are great managers because they can hold all these pieces together and hold them well. They're not mutually exclusive. And the best leaders, I think, can situationally adapt to whatever the organization needs at any given time.
Are there times when companies get this wrong? I mean, sometimes I've seen someone be appointed to a position and thought, look, it's going to be fine, but it's not going to be great. And sometimes I've seen someone appointed and I've thought, oh, that's going to be great. And maybe there is sometimes the difference between one and the other.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably extremes. I think you probably have the cult of personality on one end and what is essentially bureaucratic paralysis on the other, because too much leadership without management means they're probably chasing very shiny objects, they're burning cash, there's a bit too much kumbaya in the motivational talks and quite a risk of collapse. No names mentioned, WeWork. But on too much management without leadership means you're efficient but probably stuck. And I think a lot of companies, like you say, they hire for charisma and assume that they've solved some kind of leadership problem, or they hire for control and think that the execution is going to take care of itself. But a good system will deliberately develop both sets of muscles.
Is it hard to develop both? I mean, you're talking, I suppose one of them is to identify what is needed where and make sure that works. But is it hard to develop both?
It's not necessarily. I think, first of all, it's identifying the people who could go on either track, and then also finding the people who could wear both hats and then be situationally adaptive. And it does mean training leaders to understand process and scale, but also training managers to think about vision and people. There's a lot of mentoring and coaching and a lot of honest feedback loops that are required. I think we all know the examples at Netflix. There's a culture of feedback and being constant and candid, and leaders don't get away with only being visionary there, and managers don't get away with only being process driven. They are expected to stretch across the spectrum. So the best companies are going to have cultures where vision and execution aren't really left to chance or personality. They're taught, they're reinforced, and they're measured to avoid ending up with the extreme scenarios of either this chaos or the irrelevance.
Does that distinction matter a little bit more now? And I was making the point in a different conversation earlier in the week that I think it's probably harder to be a leader now than it's been for quite some time. There's a series of several sort of clashing transitions. Some of them are scientific, some of them are kind of technical, and some of them are cultural. And that does make it tough. And at the same time, the role of the manager can't be forgotten.
True. I mean, one of my favorite memes is it says, we aren't living in unprecedented times anymore. Like everything is just constant disruption. So it just feels like that's precedented all the time. And we're probably in the most volatile situation that we've ever been in, where, like you say, there's so many different things. AI is rewriting jobs, geopolitics are unstable. So leaders are the ones who are critical to navigate that uncertainty and point organizations towards opportunity, whereas the managers stabilize the operations while everything is constantly changing. And I think especially in South Africa, where that cultural nuance comes in, like you said, we can't afford either extreme, because the bold leaders will predict or see the growth, imagine the growth, and the gritty management will execute despite whatever constraints we have.
I suppose the other issue is to sort of work out what you want to do. I mean, I quite liked your idea of, some people set out a vision for the company. I know a good leader sometimes has been able to empower people to do whatever is the right thing for the company in a situation just by example. Now, a manager won't necessarily be able to do that, but can still encourage it.
Exactly. I mean, I think that there are lots of examples where, there can be the science of studying what makes a great manager, and we can absolutely train for that because there are KPIs that can be driven towards, and that is probably a bit more trainable. But the rising to the ranks of leadership, that's probably a little bit more where inspiration and motivation come in. And some people have it, but then when we have coaching and mentoring and helping people understand their blind spots and where their own leadership gaps are, I think we can get more people to the ranks of leadership than we have to managers, because we do need those people who are inspirational and seeding the motivational messages.
Advaita Naidoo there, unpacking the key differences between leaders and managers.
702. The best of the money show from this week.
In How I Make My Money, we spoke to Desiree Markgraaff, one of the most interesting and acclaimed producers in our television and film industry, and one of the minds behind Shaka Ilembe. She has a very politically conscious sort of understanding of the world around her, a deep passion for storytelling, and when you consider her work in Yizo Yizo, Isibaya, and Shaka Ilembe, someone who really understands popular culture in Mzansi at this time.
You know, I grew up with my mother. My father and my mother had separated very early, and I grew up in a lower income, middle class white household with a single mother. We grew up in the Johannesburg area in Jeppe, Belgravia, and went to a boarding school there. So I think I had a pretty normal sort of Joburg childhood in the 70s.
Okay, I like the way you put that. I mean, what's normal now and what's normal then are about 16 different things. At the time, information about what was really going on was quite hard to get. You would have to go and search for it. Were you aware then, and maybe as a sort of young adult, how strange our society, that society was, compared to other societies? Did you have a sense of what was sort of going on?
You know, I did. I was fortunate enough that my mother was quite politically aware. She was active to some extent through the church, that she worked at the Swedish church at the time. And so I was aware in my early childhood about the abnormal society that we lived in. And certainly I was aware of the huge disparities between growing up as a young white person and as a young black person. But I would say that I really only got an awakening, I think, properly in my 20s when I started working. And I was fortunate enough to have started working in the film industry quite young as a runner, and found myself working in Soweto. And that was, you know, just a massive awakening to me on, I think, the kind of privilege that I felt that I had grown up with. Because I'd sort of grown up thinking, well, you know, we were a poor white family and it was just me and my mom. But when I sort of opened my eyes and saw a bigger world around me, I realized that was not the case at all.
I mean, I think for some people to come to sort of leave where they've come from and go into Soweto at the time, you would have been one of very few white people, would have been quite a shock to a lot of people.
I have to say it was the best time of my life. I learned so much. I felt that I grew. One of the things that as a child I remember my mother saying to me, and I don't think I quite understood it at the time, was that she felt that we lived in an extremely superficial society because we weren't really talking about what was going on around us. And I think that had a lot to do with white guilt and white shame, and people really couldn't talk about serious issues. And so for the first time, I found in my 20s that I was talking to people about real things and experiencing real life around me. So it didn't feel strange to me at all, and I made a lot of wonderful friends that I have today, and I think it's, you know, I'm grateful. It conscientized me in a way that, I wouldn't have got otherwise, I think.
Did it inform that clearly that period informed a lot of what you did afterwards? I mean, quite a bit of your work has sort of been about that. You did a lot at the Apartheid Museum, for example. I mean, you must have, you know, that obviously set you on a road.
I suppose so, in a way. I mean, I think that the one thing was that I was particularly interested that mainstream media, television, radio, so ignored black life in a cultural way, and that the little bits and pieces that one saw on radio and television were extremely curated. And so it was something that intrigued me, and it really wasn't until I met with my partners, that I've had all these years since then, that I suddenly realized, well, this is really what I would like to focus my energy on, is telling these stories that I felt hadn't been told at the time. Of course, now television and radio and everything has changed, but it wasn't like that in the early 80s.
So how did you move through the field? I mean, I know very little about television production, but I presume it kind of goes project by project. And if you do well on one small project, maybe you get a slightly bigger role on a second small project, and then maybe a slightly bigger role on a third sort of bigger project. How was that progression?
Yeah, pretty much like that. I mean, I think when I started, I went through the industry first as a runner and then, getting various jobs and growing and learning and becoming a production manager and starting to work with money and understanding the dynamics of money. And I then started a very small little production company of my own, and I thought I'd focus on doing corporate videos where I could learn my craft without being in the public eye if I made a mistake, so to speak. And, the corporate training market actually in the early 80s was extremely vibrant and buoyant. South Africa was changing. There was this, massive push to educate around change of policies in businesses, about affirmative action. So it was a quite exciting time for the training space. And so that's what I cut my teeth on. But my heart had always really been in drama and telling stories. And then, of course, in the late early 90s, I had met with Angus Gibson and Tebogo Matlatsi, and, we started working together, and our first pitch that we really got had been to develop what then became Yizo Yizo.
Yes. I mean, I've spoken to Angus Gibson once or twice, and I mean, he really, the group, what you were doing at the time, really set popular culture for generations of people in South Africa. And Yizo Yizo was a big part of that.
Yes, it was such an exciting time, Stephen. I mean, we were sort of on this exciting moment with the end of apartheid, and South Africa felt so absolutely full of possibility. And it was the first time that we were able to really tell stories that felt like it really reflected, the whole of our population. And in a very open way, we were able to explore what the challenges were that were facing us as a society. And of course, Yizo Yizo was a story that was looking at what were the after effects of, liberation before education. Our schools were struggling, and there was a big push by the Department of Education, government, stakeholders, etc., to really try and get education back on track, and not just for a small group of the population, but for the whole population. So it was an exciting project, and it was, at the explosion of Kwaito, there was so much energy in South Africa at the time, and it was a very exciting project to work on. And we had no idea that the project was going to be the success that it was. I mean, there was no benchmark for it, really. And I don't think it was financially successful in the beginning. I think, advertisers were extremely scared of us because it was a show that was quite different, a little bit wild. It certainly, showed us warts and all. So it took quite a while before the money followed the excitement that the show generated.
I find as a journalist working here, this country has the most interesting stories. I mean, to be a journalist in South Africa is to sort of have a really close seat to dynamics and stories, and people's lives can change in ways that are just unimaginable in other countries. Does that help you, do you think, the fact that South Africa is such a rich canvas? There are so many, to say interesting people sounds ridiculous, but there are so many stories that I don't think you get in other places.
No, 100% I agree with that. I mean, I think that we have such an incredibly diverse society thrust together. And, we did a show after Yizo Yizo. We did a show for the SABC called Zone 14. And in a way, it really, captured this very well, that in one block, in one street, you could have so many different people living next door to each other: a school teacher, a millionaire, a bank robber, a taxi driver. And it makes for such an exciting society. And I think that we've got so many complex stories that we've shared. And, the human condition, aside from all the complexities of race in South Africa that we've had to overcome, that we've had to grapple with, that we keep grappling with every day. I mean, it's here, present all the time. I think just makes a society that talks about interesting things. We are interesting, I think.
You're with, I agree. I think we are. You're with The Money Show. It's 14 minutes now to 8 o'clock, and we're speaking to Desiree Markgraaff, an executive producer and someone who's had a very interesting career in TV. I would like to talk to you a little bit about Shaka Ilembe, Desiree. Let me just explain where I come from. I'm just old enough to have been allowed to stay up as a kid to watch the 1980s production of Shaka Zulu when it was shown on TV at the time. And I'm always amazed at how it still has such power today. I mean, I've come across young people who actually believe the image of Shaka is the image of Henry Clearley, the actor who played him at the time. He was a footballer before that. Was there something about that series that maybe made you want to make Shaka Ilembe to kind of move away from that? Because that version, in my mind, at least the 80s version now, is highly problematic.
Well, it wasn't that series that inspired us to make the current one, but certainly, of course, that series lives big in our imagination. And Henry Clearley was a fantastic Shaka, and as you say, there are many things that are problematic with that series in the 80s. But let's go back to the 80s and remember that at that moment, that series was incredible to have on local television. It was the first time that we had seen such a powerful representation of a black South African hero, of a king. And in many ways, forgetting many of the inaccuracy or political things that make us uncomfortable about that particular telling, which was through a white lens and a foreign gaze, it still was a series that held the character of Shaka up in high regard. But really, our story came from a totally different space. I mean, it came from me being a mother and having mixed-race children and wondering, what shows and what are we talking about? What are our kids watching on TV? Our kids are all growing up with American, Hannah Montana and Ben 10, but who are our heroes? And so many of our heroes that we see and speak about have been particularly formed around the liberation struggle. But, colonial history is only a few hundred years. There's been thousands of years of pre-colonial history with kings and queens and rulers and complex societies, and those stories have never been told. And so when we started researching, I was sort of interested in the notion of telling stories when we were kings. And when I started researching, I realized that there's just nothing visually available for young people of today to find, to read, to excite them about African history. And so, we went about trying to put the show together, and Shaka, of course, is one of the most exciting African leaders. I mean, just across the continent, and he's a worldwide recognized figure. So it felt like, well, if we're going to start, let's start there, and let's start telling that story first from an African lens. And so our, launch pad was to go and find out who this man was and what society did he live in.
I mean, there's a wonderful book called Shaka, Myth of Iron, which goes back many years. I think it was by Dan Wiley, that sort of explains all of that. Well, sort of tries to. I mean, it's very complicated. Did it spark the debates that you wanted? It had a huge impression. I mean, everywhere where I was working, people were talking about it. Did it start the debates, do you think, that you wanted? Do you think it had the kind of... And it's very hard, in a multi-channel world, I mean, it's very hard to make any kind of impression at all. It certainly made one. Did it do what you wanted it to do in terms of what we're talking about?
Yes, I think so. And I think that it's a slow burner, that it'll continue doing it because, what we wanted to do was get people starting to talk about South African history and the people who, populated this continent, and in a way that getting people interested, getting people starting to look at their own history, their own ancestry. We spent a lot of time meeting with people, meeting with descendants, meeting with members of the royal family, meeting with oral custodians, meeting with praise singers, so that our telling was not just the telling that was in history books, but also trying to really understand the cultural nuances in which this story felt like it should be told. And I think that the time taken to do that has resonated. We've had an incredible team with us. Chantal, who's, my co-executive producer, has just been an absolute bron of information and meeting so many people, of course, meeting, our previous King Zwelithini and the current King Misizulu, but also, just the richness of this history that was surfaced. And so we hope that, we were so excited, of course, that people have embraced the show so well, but really what we want to do is that this is the door that we're simply opening to much bigger telling and many more tellings of African history.
We're speaking to Desiree Markgraaff, how she makes her money. She's a film and television producer. Desiree, the people who do work in TV that I know and in film will all tell me one thing. It's long hours and lots of unbelievably hard work. If you don't want to work 12 hours a day, don't bother.
It's 100% true. It's a very hard, but it's also a sort of lifestyle, I guess. Once you get addicted to storytelling, somehow those long hours don't feel so long because you're excited about the work that you're doing and you're crafting and creating. But yes, they're very long hours and very early mornings.
And I imagine a lot of teamwork as well. You actually need to get on. You're going to chew a lot of fat, talking a lot of nonsense to each other while you're waiting for the next shot or for the sun to be just so.
Yes, there's a lot of teamwork. There isn't really that much time for talking nonsense, to be honest, because, you sort of have to be ready. Each department has to be ready for when it's their turn to be on, so to speak. But, the other thing about it is that on a show like Shaka Ilembe, for example, it has this sort of massive ability for employment. On the last season, we employed close to 20,000 people. Sure. And of course, many of those are background extras, so they're there for a day only or 2 or 3 days. But even there, you find on a set, there'll be 400 or 500 of us there. There's a real camaraderie that happens because we're all there for the same reason. And, on a show like Shaka Ilembe, of course, we all feel very strongly about what we're doing and the importance of the sort of legacy of what we're doing. So, yeah, there's camaraderie and long hours, but, often a very good energy in those spaces. So you come away after a 3 or 4 month shoot feeling like you've made family and you've built something together, and then suddenly this family is disbanded, which, of course, leaves you feeling a little empty for a few weeks afterwards.
No, I'm sure. The way in which we entertain ourselves is changing, and I mentioned earlier that Shaka Ilembe landed in very much a multi-channel world, by which I mean hundreds of channels, everybody watching things at different times, very different from, say, watching TV in the 1980s. Do you think the demand for content like that, I'm talking about episodic series, 46 minutes or so, maybe an hour, maybe in some cases an hour and a half if you look at something like Yellowstone. Do you think the demand for that is going to continue?
I think that good storytelling will change its forms a little bit in different ways. But yes, I do think that demand will continue. And I think that is about, in a way, these big television drama series is the new book. We're reading at the moment little bite-sized things on our phone, and so much information is flying at us in bite-sized moments. And there is something about just sitting down with a cup of tea or a glass of wine and enjoying a good story for an hour. And so I do think that there's, still a lot of life left in this form of storytelling.
Desiree Markgraaff there, talking about her journey in television and film, and really talking about storytelling.
The best of the Money Show
on 702.
702.
Investment School this week, Chantal Marx, Head of Equity Research at F&B Wealth and Investments, and Francois, Portfolio Manager. We discussed hedge funds and looking at the roles that hedge funds play in constructing your portfolio, and particularly whether it's a good idea to include an allocation to hedge funds or not.
So a hedge fund in South Africa is a regulated investment fund, similar to what a unit trust is. It's regulated in terms of SISCA since, I think, about 2015. What makes it different from a traditional unit trust is that it is typically not constrained by a benchmark or an index. So in other words, it typically will have the best ideas of the investment manager in size. So if we think ABSA is the best investment for the current period, we are independent of the size in the index. We will take a bet based on that. And I say a bet, we make an investment based on that. It's a regulated unit trust in South Africa, and there are two types. So there's a qualified investor fund, which is typically one that takes a little bit more risk, and you need to be a qualified investor to invest in that. But for the man on the street, there's a retail investor hedge fund, which takes substantially less risk, but gives you the opportunity to participate in an investment manager's best views.
Okay, so the investment manager can do what they like. So they can decide, we're going to put half of our money into ABSA, and we're going to put the other half of our money into ShopRite, and that's it, because those are the growth stocks. Or they can decide, actually, we're going to spread it as thinly as we like or whatever. But it's up to them. There's no limit.
It is up to them. There are limits. So in other words, 50-50 will not happen.
Yeah.
There are prudential limits about how big you can make a position. It's typically 20% of the NAV, so of the money that is in the fund. The maximum bet you can take is 20%. So yes, but in the end, you are still, like anything else, in the hands of the manager that you chose. So people can go off the rails and do really horrible things and very risky things, which they typically do in the pursuit of high returns. But with people that have survived, and the industry in South Africa is almost 30 years old. There are many operators that have been around for a long time, and you don't survive a long time if you take those types of risks.
Sure, where would Hollywood be without the villains, eh? Chantal, what is the advantage then of a hedge fund? The other funds have quite strict rules. Those rules are there for a reason. Why then a hedge fund? Why would you include a hedge fund in your investment?
Well, I mean, apart from a hedge fund being able to take bigger bets, they can also take directional bets or directional investments. So they can either be long, invest in something, buy it and hold it and sell it later at a higher price. And they can also short a stock. So we'll go into a little bit more detail around shorting a stock. But essentially it means that the hedge fund will benefit when the share price of a specific or the price of a specific instrument goes down instead of when it goes up. And then the hedging component of it is also quite interesting. They can include what we call derivative instruments. So they can, for example, say, in future, I commit to buying this at a certain price if that price movement or if that price reaches a certain level. And those types of instruments aren't really commonly available, particularly to retail investors. And by combining those things into a hedge fund, it results in a instrument that actually doesn't really move with the rest of the market. It doesn't necessarily go up by as much as the equity market. It doesn't go down as much as the equity market. It generally doesn't move with the equity market at all. And that provides diversification benefits. And we've spoken about that a lot. And I'm sure that you've spoken to many of your guests on Investment School about diversification, because that essentially reduces the risk of your overall investment portfolio.
Okay, so it's allowed to do more risky things, and that means there's more scope to make more money.
Yes, so that does mean that, but it also means there's scope to reduce volatility in that instrument. And by volatility, we mean it could move less. So if you decide that what you want to do with your hedge fund is to make it move less than the market, you can do that.
Can only hedge funds short a stock? I mean, most other funds, sort of mutual funds and things, wouldn't do anything like that.
No. So, I mean, generally your unit trusts are long only. And by long only, we mean they only buy things and sell it at a later date.
Okay. Francois, I knew we were going to get here at some point. What is shorting a stock?
Shorting a stock is selling a stock that you do not own, but that you have borrowed from somebody else in anticipation of being able to buy it back at a later stage at a lower price, in its purest form. If you want to know why in a hedge fund we short stocks, in the ideal world, you will short what is referred to as you'll short a stock where you think it is a business that is not a good business run by people that are unscrupulous and is valued way too high. So you think that at some point the chickens will come home to roost and the reality will set in. Those do come around from time to time, but not often. More practically, what we use shorting for in our hedge fund, and I think in most of the industry what we use it for, is there's a form of leverage. So in other words, let's just take an example. ShopRite reported 2 days ago. brilliant business, well run, doing really well. If I was in a long only environment and I had 100 Rand, I could only buy 100 Rands worth of Shoprite. In a hedge fund, I can go and say, okay, well, there are two retailers in South Africa. Let's just pick anything. I'll say Spar for no particular reason. I can go and sell 50 Rands worth of Spar and add it to the 100 Rand that I've got and buy 150 Rands worth of Shoprite. Now, if Shoprite does better than Spar on a relative basis, they can both go up. If Shoprite goes up by 12, Spar goes up by 10, I still make that little spread because I've had the ability to use the borrowed money to enhance my return. So that's the one form of using shorts. The other is to protect yourself against market movement. By the same token, that same trade, we don't know what happens tomorrow. So let's say the market crash comes, Shoprite is down 10%, Spar hopefully is down a little bit more, but it protects you because your net exposure is only 50 Rand. So you've gone long. Okay. But so it really is. It's a form of getting leverage, but it's also a form of getting protection inside of your portfolio.
Okay. Within all of this, there's an issue around what are called differentiated returns and uncorrelated returns. We're going to have to use small words at this point. Chantal, what's the difference between the two?
So differentiated return is just a different return, right? So
different to what?
Different when you're looking at two specific instruments or two specific funds, it's just the one return is different than the other return. The one has returned more and the other one has returned less, right?
Okay, so that's a diversity thing.
That's a diversity thing. Uncorrelated means that it actually doesn't move together at all. So differentiated would be maybe one goes up 10, one goes up 12, and uncorrelated will be one goes up 10% the one day, the other one's down 2% that day, the next day the one's up 4%, the one's down 0.2%. Like they just don't move together at all.
Okay, so the reason you would do that is if peace broke out in Ukraine tomorrow and you had a lot of money in European arms stocks, you would lose a lot of money. If you have differentiated or uncorrelated returns, you wouldn't, because you would have diversified elsewhere.
You wouldn't have only bought European arms. You would have bought consumer stocks, for example, maybe with a previous exposure to Ukraine specifically, or a company that is involved still in Russia, like, for example, Barlow World, even though they're under offer, so that's probably not a good example. But a company like that would benefit if peace broke out.
Okay. Okay, I think I get that. So then when we talk about, Francois, the experience that you need to actually invest in something like this, it must be quite technical if you're saying to someone, you're about to give your money to someone who manages this, but you can only give your money to someone who manages this if you really know what you're doing. Because I expect the person who's managing it to really know what they're doing.
Yes and no. So I started out by saying that in South Africa today, hedge funds are just investment funds that are regulated in terms of CISCA. We've got two kinds, which is the qualified investor fund, which gives you wider scope to do more things and typically would do a bit more risky stuff. So the main thing it would do is have more leverage. Retail hedge funds are for the man on the street. You trade them daily. You can get in and out every day. So the answer is no.
Right. Okay. No, I think I've got it. Thank you. So then, when these work over time, they must build up a track record, Chantal, and you kind of know what you're dealing with. And some of them must just get bigger and bigger and better. They attract more investments, more money. They invest over time. You have compounding. So over time, you have these big behemoths, and you kind of know their actions quite well.
Yeah, so I think that most of the retail hedge funds, particularly in South Africa, have built up a reasonably strong track record. They're well known and well supported by financial advisors as well. They play a really important role in a personal portfolio, and I think even in the kind of regulated space, so in the pension fund or retirement annuity space, they also have a very important role to fulfill. So these generally there aren't that many. But the winners keep on winning, I guess, because they're well known and they're doing the right things and they're not taking massive bets and they're not Wolf of Wall Streeting your retail client base.
So, Francois, you've spoken about the two main types of hedge fund, but within all of that, I presume you get all sorts of other types. You get global equity funds and things like that. What are the sort of differences between them?
So in classification, the main differences are the universe within which you can invest. So similar, again, I'll go back to what I said about Cisco, and in South Africa, we've got the ASISO, which is the governing body that determines how you classify your fund. So a global fund would allow investments offshore as well, and the majority of them would be offshore. So you would play in markets or invest in markets like the US, the UK, Europe, wherever in the world. Whereas if you were a South African fund, then you are constrained by the rules governing our ability to go offshore. So we can take 40% to 45% of our assets offshore. Similarly, you get bond funds where the managers in those funds would look for opportunities, same as what we do in equity. So you look for things which you think are better investments than the others, and you would go long one, short the other, and they would do the same within the bond environment, both in South Africa and offshore.
Okay. So it's really about where you're putting the money.
Yes.
Okay. And I presume, Chantal, you'll be very careful beforehand in terms of your own investment strategy of what you were looking for when you were looking at which one to go into.
Yeah, so I think that when you're looking at a hedge fund, just broadly speaking, we've mentioned uncorrelated, right? But you still want to make sure that the exposure that you have is in keeping with what your own personal financial plan is and in keeping with what is in the rest of your portfolio. But I think it's actually probably a good idea to have more than one hedge fund, and probably a good idea to have more than one hedge fund. Have those hedge funds have different strategies as well and different exposures as well. It will continue to add to that diversification benefit.
So the big plus about having this in your portfolio is that it brings the old phrase is alpha, I suppose, is that because there's very clever people managing it who understand risk, and because they're also trying different things, you've got much greater potential of actually increasing your money over time. That's the real advantage of coming from this. Yeah,
so I mean, there's the alpha benefit, but because of just the way that hedge funds have been almost, for lack of a better word, marketed over time, it's always marketed or thought to have a lot more risk. But when you're looking at something like risk-adjusted returns, so by that I mean for every percent that you gain from a portfolio or alpha, that percentage alpha that you get from that specific instrument, what is the unit of risk or the volatility that you're taking on additionally to get that extra alpha? And if you look at South African retail hedge funds over time, they actually have better risk-adjusted returns. So you're actually getting more bang for your buck. You're getting more alpha for relative to the risk that you're taking on than you would long only.
Francois, how much money is there in hedge funds in South Africa? How big is this industry here?
So Navari does a survey every year. The most recent one that was published was 2024, and it's around 150 billion rand. I think the exact number was 154 billion or something like that, but call it 150 billion. And it's split roughly half and half between what is referred to earlier as the retail hedge funds and the balance as the qualified investor funds.
Okay, so we're talking about significant amounts of money here. So in other words, their decisions can actually have a material impact on where money goes, how well people do, and maybe even on one or two sort of smallish industries that could start to have a big impact at 150 billion rand.
Absolutely. And what you have to think about also is the 150 could be leveraged. So if you say the typical hedge fund has got 25% leverage or 50% leverage in it, you can say that number becomes 250 billion of value that is being managed by these managers.
Chantal, I mean, yes, we go to a hedge fund because we want a little bit more risk and therefore a bit more reward, but I presume regulations still apply. I mean, you can't just be a maniac when you're managing these things.
Yeah, I mean, when you're managing them, certainly you cannot be a maniac. I mean, you are governed by the by these supervisory authorities that look after unit trust generally, and hedge funds would be included in that. And I think even as an investor looking for hedge fund exposure, you also similarly can't really be a maniac. I mean, obviously, when it's your discretionary money, you can do quite a lot, but when it's your pension money, it's max 10% and 2.5% per hedge fund. So you can't bet your entire future on a hedge fund.
So you can only put 2.5% of your pension into one hedge fund?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't realize that. Okay, so what this then does and what it means, Francois, there's still quite tight rules around all of this. I mean, the whole system is designed so that you don't mess up your pension. I mean, that's the whole point of it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would just echo what Chantal has said. So we have done a lot of research. Clearly, we want to market our ability or our products. But in the end, you are better off by adding a little bit of hedge funds. It's not, by no means are we saying you should put 10 or 20 or 30, bet the farm on it. But adding a little bit gives you an opportunity to get the same. Basically, in money management, they talk about you have a target return at a certain level of risk. Now, by adding a hedge fund, you can get the same return at a lower risk or a higher return at the same risk, basically.
But I mean, a sprinkling of salt can make the meal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Chantal, obviously you've got to be careful, but you do need to have some exposure to hedge funds. And if you don't, you need to speak to whoever's advising you about sort of managing that process.
Yeah, so I think getting proper financial advice on where a hedge fund fits into your portfolio and what hedge funds are appropriate for your portfolio and your specific risk appetite, I think is probably the best course of action. I think most of the larger LISPs or investor platforms will also have cherry-picked hedge funds that have a proper long-term track record and that is well supported by financial advisors out there as well, if you just want to start by taking a look.
That was Chantal Marx and Francois Olivier unpacking the role of hedge funds in constructing your portfolio.
702. You are listening to The Money Show's best bits.
You've been listening to the best bits of The Money Show, a digest of some of the most interesting interviews from the show this week. If you'd like to hear more, please go to our website or your podcast app and search for The Money Show. Thanks very much indeed for listening. We'll be back with The Money Show on Monday at 6 o'clock. Have a good weekend.